I drive my car up to the lake as if there's someone to awake. I haven't been to bed for days, I live in a twilight haze. And I set my heart to the setting sun, and I hope that no one else has done it. And the drinks are never far, open up the bar. I miss you every single day. I wait until it's not your way. I hate
But I tend to think that if it's reusable and it will last 5 years or longer, then it's an all right thing. Yeah. So Sara Templeton, sorry, blabbing on about sandbags.
You're liking the sound of your own voice there, Dave?
Yeah, well, someone has to start. So now you're a city councillor, and you represent. I'm pretty non-political in some ways. The opposite as well. I'm kind of political, but anyway. So how does the whole city councillor thing work? Like, you represent a certain area, but also you've also representing the whole city as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm elected by the people of the Heathcote ward.
Yep.
So one of 16 wards across the city for city councillors to be elected.
Yep.
So we have 16 councillors plus the mayor.
Yep.
But when I'm sworn in to do the best for the city as a whole. And so while the people of Heathcote elected me and I represent them and their views, when it comes to decision making, I'm actually legally bound to make decisions in the best interests of the whole city.
Yeah. I see.
And so there's a bit of a tension there. Because politically you want to get re-elected, all of those kind of things. And so you find that across the city, people will, even though they're city councillors, people tend to spend more time, more energy in their own wards, which makes sense.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
How many people were in the Heathcote area?
Last count, I think, between 22 and 23,000.
Oh, yeah.
People all up.
Are
Fewer
they
than
nice?
that are voters.
Nice people? Are they angry?
Of course they're nice people. I mean, the people vary in workplaces and across the city, and not everyone shares my views.
Yeah.
So, a contested election is really good because it means that you get to, have people get a choice.
Yeah.
And so there'll be, a number of people, what is it, 1,600, 1,700? Oh, I'm not really sure. Last election who didn't vote for me, voted for someone else.
Yeah.
And so, so they don't believe that I represent their views particularly, but I'm still their city councillor.
Yeah,
So we used
exactly.
to have a system where we had multiple councillors per ward. We had larger wards. So it used to be Hagley Ferrymead, and that went from the central city all the way out to Sumner, and it had two councillors.
Yeah.
And so you tended to have at least one councillor who represented your views, but we went to single councillor wards 6 years ago.
Yep.
And so there's a bit less choice, and we've had fewer candidates stand, those kind of things since then as well.
Is that something you're kind of not really into, or are you kind of okay with it, that change? Were you?
That was when I was first elected.
Right,
so
I see.
The first election in 2016, when we had single councillor wards, we went down from what used to be sort of over the 4 elections beforehand, 3.9 candidates per seat, down to 2.6 candidates per seat.
Right.
There's a whole pile of things around incumbency. So an incumbent councillor has a bit of an advantage. And so I think people, elected councillors tend to like single councillor wards because they feel a bit safer kind of thing, I think.
Yeah.
But actually democratically it's not very good. And so
I see.
there was a few of us trying to change it, the last representation review, to go back to the larger wards with multiple councillors so voters would get more choice, but it didn't get through. But in 6 years' time we can give it another go.
Yeah, I see. In 6 years' time?
Yeah, every 6 years you have to do a representation review. So
And what drew you to local, politics as opposed to national?
Yeah, it was a function of the quakes. So I was having time off having kids when the earthquakes hit. I used to teach English, and so I had 3 small children. And in Heathcote Valley, so it's where the seismometer was that recorded that 2.2 G vertical. It's a lot of damage. About 300 metres from our house. So I was doing a whole pile of community volunteering, that kind of thing. sort of protested against our local volunteer library being demolished.
Yep.
And was tapped on the shoulder by some locals and said, why don't you stand for community board?
Yeah.
And that was my way in. So I was like, actually, what's a community board initially? So I went to a whole pile of community board meetings.
That's where me and Milton are at.
Yeah. And that's right.
I looked it up this morning. I was reading it, what a community board is. Like, it's all set out on the website.
Yep.
Or on your website.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Very informative.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm sort of trying to do that sort of Council 101 kind of stuff on my website.
It's
trying
a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
So I spent 3 years on the community board. So it's a really weird thing to go straight into politics, run your own campaign after some time off working, and your job interview is putting your face on a billboard 1.2 metres by 2.4 metres.
Full on.
It's just the weirdest thing.
A lot of... Because doing a little podcast like this, we were talking before about why am I doing it, and I'm still trying to work out why I'm doing it. And I sort of had a vague idea. And then there is a certain point where I guess that's that imposter syndrome thing, right? Completely. Where you're kind of thinking, am I really meant to be doing this?
Yeah.
Or like, not.
Yeah.
That's pretty full on.
It was pretty cool. But I could see that there was a disconnect between what council was doing and what our local community, for example, wanted. And our local facilities and things, and community gardening that was ramping up after the quakes. And so I thought, well, if I get onto the community board, then I can help make a difference there. Yeah. And that was really cool. So I chaired the community board, my first term on it, which was a very steep learning curve, but really glad I did. Yeah. And then 3 years later, there was the change in ward system, 2016.
Right, yep.
And I knew that if I wanted to make a bigger difference on a broader scale, more than just local stuff, that I needed to be on council. Yeah. And so
did you see the did you see the effects that you were able to have in that initial community board? Like, were you able to kind of see that, I am being heard and I can make change?
And some of it was, small bits and pieces and some funding things and getting facilities off the ground, that kind of stuff. But some of it was that systems change stuff. So we had a thing where we were brought a report as a community board for the lease renewal for Trees for Canterbury, Green and Fleet Trust, down on Charlesworth Reserve. And they were like, well, we used to charge them $10,000 a year for leasing the space. Yep. And we now want to charge them $17,000 because they're a commercial business. And we're right. Actually, they're a social enterprise. Yeah. Yes, they sell things, but it's all to further the whole native planting and do the work that they do. They have a whole pile of people employed there that wouldn't normally be employed. And so I was like, well, how can you be thinking of them as a full business when actually they do a whole pile of good? And so as a community board, we went through a process and we had the decision making. So instead of nearly doubling it, we halved it. And we were able to do that, which was great. But then a couple of weeks later, we had a report coming to us for a lease of some council sports field stuff to a sports group. And it was at a hugely discounted rate because of the good they do in the community. Right. And I was like, how come that doesn't fit with the social enterprise thing? So we went through a process for community groups and things as well, and working out where the system and what the changes were. And I managed to get changes through that meant that now the social enterprises and community spaces get the same discount that the sports groups do. Oh, I see. Cool. And they hadn't done that in the past. And so it was working out how to change the system to get better outcomes for a broader range of people rather than just the one-off at a time. And that was one of your first kind of wins or something, I don't know. At a broader scale. There'd been lots of small bits, but at a broader scale,
up until then, had you kind of been just thinking, because when I look at it all, like, there's some very vocal groups of the community and stuff, like, and it sometimes seems that not even they get their way kind of thing. Like, and it's kind of like, well, do I really have the energy to be as vocal as they are and sort of strive for something and perhaps not get heard anyway? Like I don't know. Like,
it's really hard. In any decision that we make as a council, we're not going to be able to please everyone because the views across the community are so diverse. That's right. And so the question is, how do you take those views into account and take those views with all of the other information that you've got and then make a really good decision.
Yeah.
And so you might have, 3 controversial decisions coming up, and someone might agree with 2 of your decisions but disagree with 1. They focus on the disagree one and go, look, council doesn't listen.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be recognition that we listen a lot, and we always make changes. I can only think of 1 or 2 decisions, really big ones, that we've made where we haven't made changes or tweaks and things based on community feedback. But yeah,
because there must be an overarching vision, is there, or an overarching kind of?
Yeah, we've got a strategic direction. As an elected council, we get to set the direction of council. So it's that whole which direction are we heading in over the next 10, 20 years. Yeah. And at the moment, the strategic direction, so that's different to the legal stuff that we always have to do, and the day-to-day kind of stuff. There's a direction, there's kind of 5 or 6 things, but they include affordability, because actually it's, you want to be careful with people's money and those kind of things. But they include climate change. For example, and it's the first time that climate change and doing everything we can to mitigate and adapt to it has been part of a strategic direction for the council, and that's been in maybe 6 years now, and 5.5 years, and it has made a difference to the organisation because it filters through, and so as elected members setting that direction has meant that the library's picked it up, they now report on it, and they do their sustainable living series, and they've got a whole pile of things in the library where they run courses and stuff like that. So
because there must have been something before climate change. Was there sort of a sustainable element, or was there a conservation element, or was there just sort of, or there must have been an environmental kind of aspect?
Yeah, I mean,
to the decision.
There's always been lots of plans and strategies. So we had the climate smart strategy that was in place already when I was elected, and that looked at lowering emissions and doing a range of things within the organisation itself, but actually more broadly. And the Cycleways Network, for example, were about connecting the city, but also about lowering emissions. But it wasn't ever an elected member. It was a group of us got together, the whole council got together after the 2016 election and went, right, what are the core things we want to achieve as a council? And those things ended up becoming the strategic directions.
I see. Cool.
Yeah.
Full on, because you're on quite a few little different groups. I've written some of them down. The chair for Sustainability and Community Resilience Committee, Climate Change, and the council representative on the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee.
That's right.
So when you're a part of those little groups, you're kind of drawing in information in order to help you do your job better, right? Yeah,
that's right. So there's a couple of things where, so the Sustainability and Community Resilience Committee, which the original name was going to be the Community Resilience and Sustainability, but it would have been the CRAS Committee really, really quickly. So we changed it over.
Yeah, true.
And
good acronym.
So that's a committee of the whole. So actually all of council sit around the table for that committee. And so we've got mostly committees of the whole this term, which is a bit different to previous terms where we've got smaller committees. And so that committee is responsible for a pile of decision making around community stuff and climate. So the focus on the climate change strategy, but also the arts, the art gallery, libraries, heritage, social housing, civil defence, parks, sports and rec, those kind of things. And so I chair the committee that has those things within its terms of reference for the whole city. Yeah,
I feel like that's a massive kind of...
It was huge.
...area, like umbrella.
I had that list written down and you remembered every single one of them. Gosh.
Yeah, I think we had 19 or 20 committee meetings this term for that committee. And so as committee chair, I meet with staff and the deputy, who's Melanie Coker, and we go through each agenda ahead of time, looking at the different reports coming up, making sure they've got all the right information with them, and then chairing the meetings when we do it. But there was some reporting that we hadn't had as a council. So we hadn't had really detailed reporting on how our libraries operate, for example. And so that's something I asked to come, and on parks and sport and rec. And they've been really good reports. So we're getting much more detail about, how many people are using our libraries, the different things that are happening there. So we get that more governance oversight.
And the resiliency, in what aspect does that kind of play?
Yeah, in my committee, it's more of the community resilience, so making sure that we've got, that community governance space where communities are supported and connected, and they've got spaces to connect, and that we're so we do the funding as well, the grant funding. So we do about $8 million a year in community grant funding of various types. Some of that's through the committee and the Metropolitan Fund and the Discretionary Fund, Heritage and Sustainability funds. But other funding goes through the community boards as well. So each community board gets between $500,000 and $700,000 a year for community grants to support community groups, community gardens, residents associations, those kind of things.
And why is it the word resilience? Like, is it? I sort of imagine resilience. There has to be something bad happening in order to be resilient, or not? Not really.
No, because actually
just kind of
being connected beforehand. Being connected beforehand means that you are more likely to be resilient in the face of a disaster. So when the earthquakes hit, those communities that were already connected fared much better and were able to look after themselves a bit more than communities that weren't, if that makes sense.
In my head, I kind of have an image of like a stretchiness. It's sort of stretchy. It can kind of withstand impact because it's got those connections made, or like a net or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. And Climate Change Working Group, that one, how is that separate? Like, is that from the sustainability one?
Yeah, so it's a working group. So we've got the formal committees, and then we've got a set of working groups as well. And I chair the climate change one. And so looking at the implementation of the climate change strategy, which we've passed this term. So Kia Tūroa Te Ao, which is the Māori for ensuring the world continues, which is quite a nice name for, for our climate resilience strategy. So Kia Tūroa Te Ao. And so the implementation of that and looking at how that's going. So the implementation plan's being it's a work in progress. It's slower than I'd like, but not having all of the paperworky stuff done doesn't mean we're not doing stuff in the climate change space. So
full on. So what is because you're involved in so many things, like what does your average day kind of look like when you go to work? Because it seems like there's a lot of juggling going on, I mean, I don't know.
So they're the committees that I'm kind of, they're the main ones. I've got other working groups and stuff as well. So I'm on the Transport Plan Working Group, and I'm on the Coastal Hazards Working Group. So that's looking at the adaptation space for sea level rise, which has been really, really interesting work, and really important work for us as a really low-lying city. Greater Christchurch Partnership's really interesting. So we've got the mayor or chair plus 2 councillors from each of Christchurch City, Waimakariri, Selwyn and Ecan. And we all meet once a month to look at things that go across our boundaries in the greater Christchurch area, which is really, really good. So everything from sort of a greater spatial plan for the whole area through to mass rapid transit, that kind of thing. But a typical day, they vary quite a lot. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday tend to be filled with more formal meetings. So committee meetings, council meetings, that kind of thing, and some of the working groups. Mondays and Fridays are often hearings panels. So if there's a decision to be made on something, so we've got the new lease, the renewal of the lease for the gondola coming up, for example, that's been consulted on. There are some people who would like to come and talk to council before the decision's made, so we've got a hearings panel, and there's 3 councillors who will sit on that, and I'm one of them. And we'll look at the submissions that were made on whether we should renew the lease for the gondola, and hear from people who wish to speak to us on those, listen to staff and the information that they've got, and then make a recommendation to council on that. And so I do quite a lot of hearings panels, sometimes on the Lincoln Road bus lanes, Antigua Street, cycle connection, those kind of things.
Full on. That's intense, coming into all of that whole world of that decision-making process and stuff. And
there's a lot of upskilling, I think, to do. So I've really focused on my first 3 years. So I didn't have any sort of chairing or anything in my first 3 years, and I focused a lot on upskilling, so professional development, going to conferences, those kind of things, to make sure that I had as much background information and technical knowledge and those kind of things. So we're making decisions on everything from transport to water to community facilities.
Gee whiz.
It's pretty cool though. It's it's I sometimes look at from the 6th floor at council, and you look out across the city and you're like, shit, it's quite it's a really big responsibility.
It's intense
to be making some of those decisions.
It's quite cool though, because you just know, you probably know so much of what is actually happening and stuff. I tend to leave home, come to work, and then go back again.
Yep.
And I don't really look outside my little blinkered view. And I don't really know. I just make all these assumptions about what's not happening.
But that's normal, right? I mean, the thing is...
I think so.
Yeah, it's... unless something's directly in front of you, you don't think about whether it's happening or not, and you probably assume that it's not.
Yeah.
And, you come across that quite a lot, especially in the transport space.
Oh, yeah. So transport means in Christchurch kind of roadworks. I've got a theory that we had the earthquakes, we got all of those road cones, and then afterwards we needed to keep them in employment, the road cones, and we just started doing roadworks. Crazy. What's going on? Does Christchurch have more roadworks than any other city in New Zealand? Like, is that... Because I feel like a lot of people...
We're still fixing stuff.
A lot of people... Yeah, we're still fixing stuff. The infrastructure.
We're still fixing the infrastructure. And it was never going to be quick, but I think people assumed that it was.
Yeah.
And so we had Skirt. I don't know if you remember Skirt. They were that kind of amalgam of different groups after the earthquakes that did a whole pile of roading repairs and infrastructure repairs.
Yeah.
But they were only tasked with bringing the city back up to like a level of service that actually wasn't completely fixed. And so even after Skirt,
kind of
been
like
left
at a
with
functional...
network functional
and
sort of back to the sort of average level.
Yeah.
But because some things got, ended up being fixed to a standard that was better than they were beforehand because they were newer, on average that meant that some roads weren't, if you like. And so I think we worked out last long-term plan sort of 4 years ago that we're about $4 billion down still at that point. So
seems like a lot of money.
$4 billion worth of infrastructure kind of to be fixed.
Infrastructure
across the board.
Yep.
That wasn't done as part of the sort of government and council arrangements, shared stuff. So over time that has to be done. And it does take a long time. So
I've got a question. I don't know how controversial it is, but this is something that I've heard, that Christchurch was, because I'm pretty out of touch with a lot of things, Christchurch was underinsured as far as our infrastructure went, and then the earthquake kind of hit and it left us in a tricky position, and we're sort of playing catch up for that, or...
Yeah, see, it's before my time.
Yeah,
so I can talk to the bits I know, and that we got less insurance money.
Yeah.
Then you might think if every individual building went at the same time, but I think it's one of those ones where I don't think anyone ever expected half the city to go.
On a personal level.
On a normal, like, you might insure to a level where you think that you might, if a whole building burns down, for example, you get all of that one replaced. But I know that there were issues with the insurance, but it was long before me. So
it's
also very expensive to insure. And it's all operational expenditure. One thing a lot of people don't get is that, and it was, it not blew my mind, but it was really eye-opening when I first got elected. There's a really big difference in rates impact to capital spend, so if you're building a physical piece of infrastructure, and an operational one like mowing parks. And so because we borrow over time for the capital things, so they will last for 30 years plus. And so we spread the cost out over multiple generations. And so we borrow for it. And at the moment, for capital spend, $95 million of capital spend adds 1% to rates.
Right.
So if you want to drop rates by 1%, you have to get rid of $95 million worth of work. But for operational spend, that's the stuff that's the day-to-day running of the city, and it benefits people right here and now in the city. And so we rate for that directly. We don't borrow for it.
Ah, cool.
Did a little bit of borrowing with COVID.
I see.
But that means that about $5 million is 1% on rates.
Oh, I see.
So if you're trying to lower rates, then doing it by cutting operational expenditure on the day-to-day running of the city is the quickest way to go. But it's also the stuff that cuts services.
I see.
So it's really complex. I know that the council before me looked at saving some money by mowing the parks less frequently. And they very quickly went back on that because they got a lot of flack from the community. For the parks looking untidy. It's
weird, eh? Like, I mean, Because, like you say, we tend to focus on the negative and stuff like that. And in the same way, you can look at a massive city. I suppose there are big things, and obviously there's the stadium and there's Bromley and stuff. But one of the other silly things that people talk about is, which is very minor, is the lack of rubbish bins and the removal of rubbish bins from places.
Yep. So again, rubbish bins are operational.
Yeah.
And so paying someone here and now to go and empty them all the time.
Yeah.
Which is why we've done a bit of a switch to those smart bins.
Yeah.
So they hold 6 times as much, and they've got a sensor in them which says when they're nearly full, so someone can come and empty them. There's been a few glitches because people have stuffed pizza boxes in, which have jammed them and stuff.
Mattresses or something.
But so transitioning to those over time will save operational expenditure, which saves rates. But also there's plenty of evidence from overseas that actually... so many overseas cities don't have rubbish bins. Yeah, people just take their rubbish home with them because actually, there's already a red bin at home, and so changing behaviours over time is really good. But the evidence is if you put a rubbish bin there and it's full or half full, people leave their rubbish beside it instead of taking it home, and actually you tend to attract more rubbish with a bin, if you like. It's kind of odd.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I kind of thought that as well. No, I think it makes sense.
People have been used to having it as a service.
Yeah,
it's counterintuitive, but people have been used to having it as a service, and so it's a hard thing to transition to over time. And I don't think that the communications over why and the evidence and stuff was shown to people kind of before we did it. Yeah. So I think I think one of the communications that I get tend to be over the dog walkers wanting somewhere, and the one trigger point actually has been Hanson Park, because it's a really large park, and so there was one smart bin put over kind of near the playground initially, and but the dog walkers actually don't often go that way, and there was lots of plastic bags left where the bin used to be. So
that's crazy.
I know, but tie it to your dog's collar and take it home.
Talking about dog poop and other massive scale things. So, talking about poop, Bromley.
I know, right?
I sort of looked at the different photographs online and stuff, and they are making progress. Is there kind of a completion sort of date set, or are we kind of, what happens when we've cleared out those massive 2 big things? There's some funny comments online.
There's lots of comments online. Lots of toilet humour. So those huge, the trickle filters. They're absolutely enormous. They are getting through that material more quickly than I think any of us expected, which has been really cool.
Oh, brilliant.
And initially we'd had a completion date for that of sort of early September, but I'm hoping it might be a bit earlier.
Oh, yeah.
But you've seen some of those photos with that, the digger inside.
That's
and stuff,
right.
They're just enormous.
Yeah, they are huge.
But they're only one of the sources of odour, because the ponds are the other one. Yeah. So I don't know. Have you always been in Christchurch? Do you remember?
Yep.
But before before a whole pile of infrastructure went in and the outfall and stuff. Yeah. That area used to smell. Yeah. So that's to do with the ponds, and in fact, for a while the trickle filters weren't covered. Yeah. As well, and so. The ponds, if the water quality isn't high, end up smelling a bit as well, which is why we've... and in fact, the ponds were the first thing to smell after the fire, once the burnt smell was gone. Yeah. And so all of the energy went into doing what we could to stop the ponds smelling as much, because the water quality wasn't as high going in, which is why we were focused on getting those big aerators in from overseas and those kind of things, because putting the oxygen in helps that smell less. And then after a period of time the trickle filters started smelling as well, and the focus went on them. So even once the trickle filters are out, there'll still be some residual odour from the ponds, but not as bad as it is now because we've got the aerators and stuff. Was it a contractor that started the fire in the first place? Not to name any names. It was. And so all of that work, the investigation stuff and the insurance and things is all underway, and not something I can talk about. Sorry.
Oh no.
But it needs to be sorted, and we need to rebuild. Repair or rebuild.
And how do you feel about the $200 for the residents and stuff? Do you think that's fair? Do you think there's anything more that we could be doing for the people who are like affected the most?
It's incredibly difficult, and I know there's a lot of people blaming council, but this is council reacting to something that wasn't our fault. And it's our piece of infrastructure, and our communities are really affected because it does stink. It wafts over to Heathcote, and we get it on some days, and it must be awful living really close. You know, people said to us, you know, can you make a contribution towards some of our costs? And so we set aside $1 million to do some of that, including going to schools and bits and pieces. But we knew when you look at all of those kind of things, it you know, it doesn't go that far, and it's really hard. There's also insurance, so for people who've got things that they've said have been damaged or whatever, actually that's what your normal regular household insurance is supposed to cover as well, damage from these kind of things. And so I think that the insurers really need to step up in that space.
Full on. It's pretty intense, and there's, I mean, everyone sort of has an opinion about it, and everyone's kind of talking about it and stuff. It is full on, but because I don't look at the media that much, I've listened to a few people who actually live there and stuff, and listened to a school principal talking about it and the effect on the students and things. It's unreal.
It is, and it's going to, you know, take some time, and it's
Is there heaps of support for them? Like, obviously there was the $200, which has actually been taken up more than I thought it would be. Like, I think there was about $500,000 perhaps has gone out. Is there kind of like, are there people going around kind of door knocking? Because they can't really use their heating. Like, that's one of the problems, like the heat pumps sort of sucking in the air from outside and then just spreading it inside. Is there what other things are going on that are kind of supporting them?
We've regular meetings so that people can discuss all those issues and try and work out ways of solving them, which is really good. So there's I think there's 3 more meetings coming up. I think maybe 2 at different times today, plus another one. Maybe it's at 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock today. There are meetings at the Bromley Community Centre. Oh, cool. And, you know, I've heard that they've been really useful meetings,
sweet.
One so far, and we've set up a community liaison group as well, of members of the community that are sitting in there with council staff on a regular basis.
Cool. So you feel like the relationship is pretty good?
It's improved.
Okay.
It would be fair to say that the communication in the early days was not good. And, you know, we've been through a lot of disasters as a city, and every time the learning is the communication is the key thing, and so I'm not quite sure why we didn't this time as much. And partly I think it's a reluctance to give out information if you don't know things for sure. The organisation's, you know, relatively risk averse. And but the reality is that if you've got a void, people fill it with things that are not necessarily as helpful as having solid information.
Cool. It's pretty intense. But generally speaking, you think we're kind of over the hump and we're heading in the right direction?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
So
full on. And the other big thing is the stadium that people. That's a massive project. And the cost is obviously just constantly heading upwards.
I mean, the key thing at the moment is that there's actually been some really, really good media coverage, some really good, really accurate press coverage over the last few weeks since the cost overruns. Looking at, you know, timelines and what's happened and stuff. So after the earthquakes, when Lancaster Park was
destroyed,
it was.
Well, it was the liquefaction, wasn't it?
So it had lifted and dropped in bits and pieces in different places, and so the temporary stadium got put together so that the city could focus on, you know, had the stadium there, and then there was the cost share agreement, and the city could focus on doing all the other infrastructure and other things first, if you like. Rebuilding libraries and pools and and horizontal infrastructure and pipes and stuff. And but in 2013, when the cost share agreement was signed, it put in $250 million cap for council.
Yep.
And the rest of the money was to be found.
Yeah.
And there was no government funding, and the government were like, well, we'll help you find someone, that kind of thing, whether it be philanthropic or business partner. And that just didn't happen. And so the 2013 council at the time, the 2013 council did their 3-year plan.
Yeah.
And so while the cost share agreement had said 2017 opening, the government, and it was the government kind of thing, they didn't put any money on budget for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it left the next council, the 2015 council, in a really tough position because they were in the midst of this rebuild with no money for a stadium apart from the council contribution of $250. And so they put the date for building the stadium out in 2022 was going to be the start date. Where the funding was going to start, hoping that they would find the other funding and they could bring it forward, which is what we did in the 2018 long-term plan. We brought it forward a couple of years. Yeah.
So you did find some other funding?
Well, the Labor government promised the $300 million capital acceleration facility in their 2017 election. And so we had to go through a process with them to do a business case, investment case for that money, and to get to what was expected to be the $450 million, $470 million build. We took 220 of that and tagged it to the stadium, and the rest went into roading and the Avon River precinct. Yeah.
So sometimes would you get funding through philanthropic sources?
That was the government's plan initially, and including for Turanga.
Is that kind of realistic?
I don't think so.
Yep.
Although at the time, people were hoping that, because it was a rebuild and an earthquake and bits and pieces, there would be more. And I think at one point there was, $10 million to be found for philanthropic for building.
I love those terrible
Turanga,
words, to be found.
To be found, yeah. And so that's it was really tough, and so that's kind of why the stadium's being done now. And I think that if anyone had known that we would have a global pandemic and there would be a war in Ukraine, and that would send costs skyrocketing for steel and stuff, then there would have been things done to bring it, have it slightly further forward.
Yes,
but
it's
and so the cost overruns aren't necessarily because of the delay, but because we are building it now, it's the pandemic and everything
absolutely.
else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But it's really tough, and I think that my thing has been, I don't know if you've seen on my Facebook post, it's just been about having really good information so that people are really aware of the impacts of those cost increases when it comes to other infrastructure we might like to fix or build. So $150 million, for example, is more than we have planned for public transport infrastructure for the next decade. So, in the past, people have complained that we're spending too much on a bus lane or whatever. And I'm like, well, where's our priorities?
Well, that's having perspective, because a lot of people don't have, I don't have that perspective of knowing what $1 million looks like or what $200 million looks like. What can you actually get done with it, and what can you achieve, and where is it best spent?
It's really, really tough. And the Christchurch needs a stadium, and we need to be able to, it's the last piece in the jigsaw that is the rebuild of the city. So we do need a permanent place for people to gather and have large events. But the question is, how much are we willing to pay for that? And what are the opportunities that we lose if we do? And we don't necessarily need to lose any opportunities. We can still keep everything else we were planning on doing. It just does mean that rates will be higher to do that. So,
I sometimes look at it as a family and imagine, this is probably wildly a bad idea, but anyway, and I kind of think, well, in a family situation, you wouldn't want to, if the budget doesn't extend to buying a new car or putting a new deck on the house or something like that, you wouldn't do it, or you would scale it down and keep it within what you can kind of afford. Is there a kind of a... do people think that way in the city council? Do they kind of think, okay, well, it would have been nice to have this big flash stadium. Can we just sort of scale it back a bit, and maybe it won't be, and this will do the job for X amount of
Yep.
Yes.
So some people are thinking that way. Other people are just really keen to get on with what we've already got planned, because there will be delays if you need to redesign. But then if you're redesigning something that's slightly smaller, it would likely be quicker to build. You know, it's that kind of. So there's pros and cons. So I mean, in the investment case. And all of the experts, so the stadium experts from around the world, that kind of thing, that were helping us with the investment case and what to do, said that 25,000 was the sweet spot for Christchurch. Yeah. Because actually, when you know that, I don't know if you've been, I went to the Cape Town in Wellington for a concert, and it was Sting, the Police, that kind of thing. It's that I was a teenager in the 80s, and so it was very much my kind of concert. But it was only half full. And so the atmosphere isn't that good. So filling things more frequently is actually really good, is what they were saying.
That's a cool idea. I like the sound of that.
Makes sense.
That's like when you serve a meal and you leave the guest wanting more, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right. And you create this demand. And so making sure that that the stadium is full more frequently and that you've got a really good atmosphere is really important. So we've probably got... in the current design, 5,000 seats that will only be used 4 times a year maximum. And that means that there'll be 5,000 seats sitting up there that aren't used, and making the stadium look less full and stuff like that. And,
I guess it's like being at the dinner table, having 3 seats, not full up day, but it just sucks the atmosphere out a wee bit.
Yeah, true.
Or you go to a community meeting and the first 2 rows are always vacant. Because no one wants to be sitting at the front.
Why is that?
I don't know, because you might get tagged to do secretary or something. I don't know.
I see.
Right.
No one wants to be called on to speak. Yeah.
Well, it's like going to Scared Scriptless or something, and you don't want to sit at the front.
That's it.
Yep.
God, I haven't done that in years.
No, me neither.
I used to go when they were at Court Theatre,
same.
when I was actually in my late teens.
I think they still might be going somewhere.
Yeah, totally.
Yep. Yeah.
Full on. And you're really into the e-bike thing, eh?
I am now. So I biked here this morning in the rain and bits and pieces.
They're all southerly and
5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
It's never quite as bad as you think it's going to be. Like when you go for a walk or something in the rain and you're
that's true.
When you're hearing it on the roof, you're like, but you get outside and I'm like, oh, it's actually not that bad.
It can even be slightly exhilarating.
Yeah, it's like it's really fresh. As long as you've got wet weather gear and stuff, it's not too bad. I didn't bike at all as an adult, not since university until sort of 6 years ago. And I found myself on the community board, chairing the community board during a meeting where we were going to make a recommendation to council on the route selection through Linwood of the Rapanui Shagrock Cycleway. I was like, right, so who's biked the route? No one had. And so we were making recommendations to council on something that none of us had done. None of us had biked it. I don't think I even owned a bike at that point. And I was like, that's not good enough, because it's different when you're on a bike going through roads than in a car or on foot. So at that point I decided I needed to do something, but I was unfit and overweight and 3 small kids and all of that kind of stuff. So I did a bit of research and bought an e-bike. And that...
Was that quite early on when they started coming out?
Yeah. So they'd been out a couple of years, but it's... I used to get stopped in the street. People would stop me and go, oh, is that an e-bike?
Oh, wow.
It was that kind of early. And I'm on my second battery now, but it's changed how I live. And the first year and a half, I guess, it was more of a, I was just using it occasionally to get to community board meetings, that kind of thing. And because I was juggling community board with being primary caregiver for the kids. And, but once I got elected to council, and they say this is the thing, you change your transport habits, because I was coming into town every day. And, my husband had switched to doing the primary caregiver thing, so he'd dropped his hours back so I could do council full time. And I just started using the bike every day. And then I found, after a couple of years, I was barely using the car at all for anything. And I was like, well, why do I even own a car? And so a couple of years ago, I sold it. And
I noticed you said that your car would take between an average of... Was it 20 to 30 minutes to come into town?
Depending on the weather and stuff,
But with your e-bike, it's like 24 minutes
every day.
Every day, bang on.
Yeah, because you don't have to sit in traffic. You're legally allowed to go up the side of the traffic, or down, going down Ferry Road or something on the way home, and the cars are backed up, and you're just going to whiz past, and it doesn't delay you at all. And I know yesterday I was over at a meeting at Ngāi Tahu in the evening, and there were councillors who were driving from from council to get there, and a couple of us on bikes, and it was actually super quick through the park and stuff, and so it's,
you get to know the back roads, little alleyways or whatever.
Yeah, and there's lots of little shortcuts, and the new cycleways have been amazing,
right.
and we've seen a big, increase in the number of people biking, and a lot of, especially with e-bikes, there's a huge increase in the number of older people biking.
Yeah, noticed that,
and,
big groups of them. They're really enjoying it.
Yeah. Which is really, really cool. So,
actually, my partner and I, we went out on the northern arterial route. The cycle tracks going out to along the motorway, out to Kaipoi, and I think they go out to Rangiora.
Yeah, it does.
Man, they're really good.
It's really, really good,
And they're like really cool little artworks and things along the way.
Yeah,
it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, I've biked out to a couple of meetings at Kaipoi and stuff.
Did you?
And
oh, wow.
from Heathcote.
Cool.
And it's almost all protected cycleway.
Yeah.
Which is really,
you
really
feel
cool.
totally safe, and you can just zoom along and feel real good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, when I biked as a younger person, I always was biking down main roads which weren't great, like Blenheim Road and rush hour traffic, to and from work and stuff like that. It wasn't an enjoyable experience. I should get back into it. I would be interested in going along some of the cycleways. Yeah,
I think. You have a wee try of it. They're actually really cool. So just have a fun weekend trip or something, and decide one morning that you're going to head out to wherever. And
are you allowed to walk along them or skateboard, like longboards?
Some of them
quite
are
wide.
Yeah, some of them are shared paths. So some of them are sort of 4 metre wide shared path in sections. Some of them are just cycleway. So like Chilman St Asaph. They're just unidirectional cycle lane and things, but much of it's shared path, which is good and not good. It's mixed for some of that.
And I noticed you did a 10k run to augment your cycling on your fitness regime.
Oh gosh, that was a while ago.
Yeah, I just read it on your site. It's all up there.
Oh wow. So I was really unfit and overweight and stuff like that when I first started, but the e-bike even gave me enough base fitness to do a bit of running and things like that, and that helped hugely. So I got to the point actually earlier this year where I was sort of probably the fittest I'd ever been for a really long time as well, because I had started doing recreational cycling, not on an e-bike, on a regular bike, which had been really cool. And but my knees are stuffed now, so I can't run anymore. But so the last couple of days I've been up the bridle path, which has been lovely.
Oh, cool.
Mostly just biking now.
Yeah. Well, when I'm I've just got a non-electric bike, and my partner's got an e-bike, so she always kind of drags me off into the headwind or whatever.
That's it. Yeah. Well, the e-bike's been my gateway bike, right? So I didn't have a bike. It's been I got my e-bike. I was like, actually, this is kind of cool. Really, actually loved biking as a kid and bits and pieces, and it's really easy to stop and stuff like that as well. I'm forever stopping to send in a SnapSend solve or a customer service kind of request that there's a pothole or some graffiti or that kind of thing. Because it's easy to stop on the bike, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But it's I've forgotten what I was going to say there.
I've used that before, the old SnapSend solve.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah. Only a couple of times, but I found it really effective.
Yeah, I do. I guess 3 or 4 a week.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Have you used it, Milton?
No, I haven't. No.
No, it's a really easy way of reporting things that you want council to fix. So graffiti, and if there's shopping trolleys left around or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's set up actually with shopping trolleys. So you take the photo, you identify which supermarket, and actually it gets sent straight to the supermarket rather than going through our full system and stuff.
So and cool. who reads all of the things? There must be a dedicated team.
There's a customer service team.
Do you know how many SnapSend solves they get?
Not necessarily just SnapSend solves, but we get between about 55 and 60,000 contacts a month.
Wow.
Through the customer service team, through emails, SnapSend solves, phone calls, and stuff where people need responses. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And then so things get prioritised. So we've got teams that just go out and all they do is pretty much fix potholes, and sometimes they're proactively identifying them as they're driving around and they're just stopping and fixing them. And sometimes they're because someone has SnapSend solved it.
Yeah.
You can't fix them in the rain, so it can only be when everything's dry.
Yeah.
So that's why those ones sort of sit around a little bit.
Yep. over winter, and that's when they're getting worse as well, I suppose, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because having water underneath actually means that things are slightly squishier, and so they're more likely to
that's
cause
right,
more
they go
damage.
All breaks open again, right?
That's it, yeah. So fixing things when they're dry is the best way to keep them fixed.
We had an overnight roadworks outside our house overnight for 2 nights running, which was pretty impressive. 24 hour, like actual from, I don't know, 5 o'clock through to 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
It was intense. It was like a World War I reenactment.
And the thing is that lack of sleep sometimes when you're hearing them going is tough. More than a night, right?
Yeah.
We had the same on Port Hills Road, but it lasted a few weeks. They were resurfacing the length of the road, and there was stuff with buses, and there was a whole pile of stuff.
Yeah.
And there were a few residents who, were really struggling to sleep, and once you struggle to sleep, then everything's heightened, and that's really difficult. And I know that's been really difficult in the finishing the coastal pathway around Monks Bay, and what kind of hours can we get that sort of stuff done?
That's awesome, though.
And that kind of thing. Yeah, coastal pathway's amazing.
Was there any private funding that went into that? I think the Carters wanted to do it at one point. Put some money towards it. Yeah,
there's been a mix.
Yeah.
So there's been it's a community group who've been actively fundraising and actively pushing it. And there's an MOU with council and the community board. Actually, it's one of the first things I did a community board chair was to sign the MOU on behalf of the community board.
Cool.
And so this group have been working with council for a really long time now, and they've done a whole pile of fundraising, and council pitched in money as well, and then businesses. So the first section down the causeway was part funded by whichever contractor, and I don't want to name him just in case I get it wrong. Whichever contractor was doing the causeway work.
Oh, fantastic.
Did $250,000 worth of additional work when they were sort of widening it to do the coastal pathway at the same time. And all of that work had to happen anyway. Yeah. So it was easy just to add on a bit.
Sweet. Is that what are your highlights? Is that one of the highlights? That's a good one, that one.
I guess, the coastal pathway stuff's kind of cool, and it's one of those ones where there wasn't enough money to finish it.
Yeah.
And so in the last long-term plan, so 2018, I convinced colleagues to put $15 million on in 2027, 28, like right at the end of the 10-year plan. So, we're not going to spend it now, but let's put some money on budget in a few years' time, or, in sort of 8 or 9 years' time. And then if something pops up in the meantime, we can bring that money forward. Because it's really hard to find a new $15 million, for example. Yeah. And that's what staff had estimated it might cost out that far to finish it. And that was fine because it wasn't going to increase rates in the short term. And it meant that there was some funding there eventually. And in the meantime, the group would keep fundraising and doing what they could to build it. But that meant that when COVID hit and the government announced all the shovel-ready funding, because we had something in budget as council and we knew roughly how much it was going to cost and there'd been some work done, the community group worked with a couple of council staff members to put together an application for shovel-ready funding. But they put it in as a community group rather than as council.
Oh, that's cool.
And they won shovel-ready funding. So they won that whole amount, and we were able to bring the project forward. But only because that money had been sitting there, the budget had been sitting there as part of a program. Yeah, which was pretty cool. Yeah. So...
Which is a sign of great budgeting.
Yeah. Well, just having it there and knowing that it's there.
And that cooperation between the two. The community and the council. That's cool. Yeah,
it's been really good. So the Coastal Pathway's been an amazing project that's been going on, the whole time I've been elected. But then there's been little things like getting rid of the library overdue fines, which is just something I managed to do at the beginning of this year. It's like, and it's made such a difference for so many people.
Yes.
So, and I got so much contact from people. Just saying that they hadn't been to the library for years because they'd had a fine and they couldn't afford to pay it.
That's just a simple
barrier. And it was only $30 or something like that.
Barrier.
And just the thought of getting another fine put them off even getting books out. So that's been really cool. And that was following sort of Dunedin and Auckland. So I think I'd first heard about Auckland doing it. And why aren't we doing this? And it turns out that our library staff had wanted to, but not been able to. And so it had never come to councillors. And so,
is that citywide? Like that's just a thing
citywide.
now?
It's just a thing now. And in the annual plan, we've just done a thing where people in Akaroa who don't get quite the library service, they've got a library there, but they don't have the selection that we do in the city. we've just removed the hold phase for them, so that if there is a book that they want that's in town, it just gets transferred over to the Aotearoa Library. It used to cost $3 per book for doing that, and from the 1st of July, that's going to be free for people in Aotearoa, being held at the Aotearoa Library, because they're just not able to access the stuff here that we can.
That hold phase, it's so good. Just putting your book on hold and getting it from your local library. I don't take anything like that for granted. It's like real cool.
Yeah. So currently it's $3, and we're also going to drop that to $2 across the city. So yeah.
So there's just like the system. There's just a lot of good stuff going on, and it's like a lot of efficiencies and stuff that goes on that most people probably wouldn't even know about.
Absolutely, unless it affects you day to day.
Yeah, it's all going on.
There's enough happening in everyone's lives that they don't. They don't take a lot of notice in that.
Just getting an insight into it is like, wow. It's very organised and it seems pretty cool.
That's good. Yeah. So that's part of what I see my role as, is trying to put out some of that stuff that we're doing. So So I've got my website, which I started last year, and because a lot of people actually aren't doing social media for various reasons currently, so normally I was just doing Facebook for the most part, a little bit of Instagram, a little bit of Twitter, but mostly Facebook, and really trying to see my role as a conduit between the community and council, and putting out as much information as I can on consultations that are happening, decisions that are being made and why we're making them, on upcoming events and all of that kind of stuff. So really trying to get that stuff out there.
Yeah, because obviously I guess most people just, because we haven't got time, we just see bits and bobs through the media and often it's just a big but pretty negative.
And that's it. And I've talked to a couple of the reporters about that, and they're like, well, if council's just doing its job and it's doing all the good things that it should be doing, that's not news because it's not different, right? And so they tend to only report things that go wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's like human nature and
that's it.
Thing.
Yeah. So I've got a council achievements list, I think, on my website as well, which is the, what have we actually done this term? Cool. And I had one up there for the previous term as well. Yeah. And you look at it, and actually it's a really long list. And I went on Chris Lynch before the last election, and because people were going, council, it's all hooey and no doey. Council never do anything, they just talk and talk and talk. All hooey, no doey.
And it's that voice tone as well.
Yeah. And so I rang up and said, hey, actually, I've got this list of things that council's achieved this term. And he said, you'd like to hear that. And so I started reading it out, and I got to the bottom of the first page, and I paused, and he goes, is that it? And I said, no, I'm about halfway. He goes, keep going.
Awesome.
No, I guess to the end, and it's like, actually, that's a long list. How come we don't get to hear about this? And I'm like, we do a media release for each one of these, but because they're just us doing our job, it doesn't get picked up on. And it's just people don't take notice of the good news stuff. They're just taking news of the thing, taking attention to things that go wrong. And so I've done a list again for this term and the things that we've been doing.
Cool. Yeah. And how far are we through this term?
Elections are in October. Nominations open on the 12th of July. So, yeah.
And what does that mean for you? Like a whole nother,
another job application. Yeah. Really, another really public job application.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so nominations open on the 12th, I think, of July. So I'll need to get 150 words together, because that's all, as much as you're allowed for the official booklet, saying,
that's right.
What I've been up to and why I think I'd like to stay and why people should vote for me.
Yeah.
And a photo, which has to be within 6 months. And they get put in, just in case you change heaps in 6 months.
Yeah.
And then it's a case of, I guess, partly it's kind of that seeing what the competition's like before you decide completely on how your campaign's going to go.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
My 2016 campaign for council, when I wasn't incumbent, was really full on, and standing against a white middle-aged male incumbent businessman councillor, and it was really tough, really stressful, and so lots of billboards and social media and lots of meetings and that kind of thing. Spent $7,000 and managed to win.
Cool.
Which was great, but I was the only person to unseat a sitting councillor because of that incumbency kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I spent less last election, and I don't know. Currently, there's no one put their hand up. So currently, no one has declared for Heathcote.
Oh, right.
against me. And that's the same for 5 wards currently.
Yep.
So currently Heathcote, Linwood, Spraydon, Fendleton and Waimari
And there must
only
be
have the current councillors standing.
So is there a cut-off date when that you have to...
Yeah, it's in
put your hand
August.
up? Oh,
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think nominations are open for 4 weeks. And
It's like 17 wards. And
16 plus
16.
the mayor. Yeah, 16 wards. Yeah.
16.
And so currently 11 of them have competition and
Yes.
5 don't. So, so hopefully more people will put their hands up. But it's a really big call to make to stand for election. It's incredibly motivating though, being a councillor. I feel like I'm in a place where I make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's really motivating. So my thing, I guess, is community and environment, and I look at climate change coming and all of that. And I've got 3 kids whose planet I would quite like to be livable, and whose city I think should be sustainable in that. And so that's really motivating when it comes to helping us transition to a more sustainable sort of 21st century garden city.
Yes.
And you're walking your walk. You walk your walk.
Yeah, wheel my talk.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep,
So
yep.
and that's it. So over the last few years, I have taken up biking and my e-bike and stuff. That's my main form of transport.
And your keep cup.
My keep cup.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I might be up to maybe 15 or 20 or something takeaway cups now.
Over what time period is that?
Since I got elected to council.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So nearly 6 years now.
Oh,
and the rest of it's all been in like a keep cup.
It's
Yeah.
like
Or I sit down and have one actually in a proper cup.
Yeah.
You know, rather than just taking it away.
Yeah.
So I'd often choose just not to have a coffee if I've forgotten my cup or something. And and a couple of years ago I went vegetarian as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Full on. How have you been finding that?
actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
There's the odd thing I get caught out on.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes just in sweets because there's gelatin used.
Oh, right.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
they still use
Yeah,
that?
of course.
Yeah,
Wow.
gelatin's still used in a lot of confectionery.
And maybe honey as well.
Yeah, honey's more of a vegan thing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
okay. I'm still okay with honey and eggs and cheese. So I'm okay with dairy. Although, I don't like milk particularly, so I don't have milk in my coffee or tea or anything. But I do quite like cheese.
I just read an interesting quote on the website, which I thought was kind of interesting, just to sort of finish up. We tend to overestimate what we can achieve in a year, but underestimate what we can achieve in a generation. I thought that was pretty cool, very interesting.
Yeah. It is really cool, and I know sometimes, I feel sometimes that things at council move incredibly slowly, and each project seems to take forever. You've got to go through a process, and there's a whole pile of requirements over procurement and consultation and that kind of stuff. It sort of pull things out and delays. But when I look at, if I'd said to someone when I got elected 5.5 years ago that council would declare a climate change emergency and climate change and biodiversity emergency, set net neutral targets for both the council and for the city, and actively be working towards that, I'd have been laughed at. And we've done that. We've got the strategy in place. We're doing a whole pile of work. We're much more focused on the emissions profile of the different things we do. And while our emissions are still going up, mainly because of transport, we are now at the point where we're going to shift that. So, which is kind of cool. And, do I wish that as a country, as a planet, we'd done that 20 years ago because the science was there? Yep, absolutely. Right. But everything we can do now is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
So
that's just as true on the personal level as well, or business level. Or
I think it is.
Just chipping away and like doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Bit by bit.
Yeah. And there's day-to-day frustrations at council where things, the vote doesn't go my way or whatever. But the overall direction's really good.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's cool to hear.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in. Thanks for making the time to come in. It's cool.
Yeah, anytime. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's like really enlightening. Just, just the organisation and energy that goes all behind it. It's like really impressive.
Yeah. It's something that people often don't think about, council, and and what it actually takes to run a city.
Yeah,
well, it's like, what was it? Rob, who we had on the podcast.
Oh yeah,
doing the landscaping.
Yeah,
public landscaping.
Yeah.
And it's like, I didn't even know that was a job. It's like, I just thought that stuff just happened somehow.
Yeah, no, it just
like,
happens.
No.
You know, it has to be, really thoroughly planned and thought through, and everything interacts with everything else. It's an impressive organisation, and you don't get everything right, but, it takes a lot to run a city, and I think we do a pretty good job.
Yeah. That's cool.
Great, thanks for coming in.
Not a problem. It's been really good. Thanks for the coffee.
Welcome.